My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I drive a 2018 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper that I've never bothered to fix. My apartment in downtown Portland sits above a coffee shop that plays jazz music too loud every morning at 7. The rent is $1,200 a month, which my family thinks is too expensive for someone like me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Last Tuesday, I sat in the parking lot outside Romano's Italian restaurant, staring at the burgundy awning through my cracked windshield. The Thompson family monthly dinner, third Tuesday of every month for the past 8 years, ever since Mom passed away and Dad decided we needed structured family time to stay connected. I was 20 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I had nowhere else to be. At least, that's what they thought. The hostess recognized me when I walked in. "Thompson, party," she said before I could speak. "Your father called ahead. He's requested the private dining room again." She led me past tables of laughing families, past couples sharing appetizers, past a group of college kids celebrating someone's birthday with too much enthusiasm. The private room sat in the back corner, separated by frosted glass doors that muffled sound but not completely. I was the first to arrive. The table was set for 6, Dad at the head, my older brother Kevin to his right, Kevin's wife Sarah beside him, my younger sister Amanda across from Kevin, her husband Mike next to her, and me at the far end. The same arrangement every month, the same hierarchy: Kevin, the Dexel real estate developer; Amanda, the pediatric nurse with the perfect suburban life. Then me. Marcus, taking up space at the end like an afterthought. The menu was already decided. Dad always ordered for the table 3 large pizzas, Caesar salad, garlic bread, and whatever wine Kevin recommended. No one asked what I wanted. They assumed I couldn't afford to contribute anyway, so my opinion didn't matter. I folded my hands on the white tablecloth and waited. Kevin arrived first, checking his Apple Watch as he entered. "Traffic was murder on I-84, he announced to the empty room. His suit was navy blue, perfectly tailored, with cufflinks that caught the light when he moved. He'd driven here in his BMW X7, the black one with the custom interior that he'd spent 15 minutes describing at last month's dinner. He looked at me sitting there and nodded once, a quick acknowledgement that felt more like checking off a box than greeting a brother. "How's the job search going?" he asked, settling into his chair without making eye contact. It was the same question every month, the same tone, like he was asking about the weather, except with less genuine interest. "Still working at it," I replied, which was technically true. I was working, just not at what they imagined. Sarah followed him in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She taught 2nd grade at a private school in Lake Oswego, which she mentioned frequently, usually in the context of how rewarding it was to shape young minds. She smiled at me with the same expression she probably used with students who weren't quite keeping up with the lesson. "Marcus, how are you?" The question came with a slight tilt of her head, like she was speaking to someone who might not understand complex sentences. "Kevin told me you've been applying to some retail positions. That's wonderful. Everyone has to start somewhere." I nodded and smiled back. "Thanks, Sarah. How are your students doing?" "Oh, they're precious. We're working on multiplication tables now. It's fascinating how different children learn at different paces. Some are naturally gifted, and others—" She trailed off, but her meaning hung in the air like smoke. Amanda burst through the doors next, already talking before she fully entered. Sorry, Mike's parking the car. Olivia had soccer practice, and then we had to drop her at Mom's house, and you know how traffic gets around." She stopped when she saw me. "Oh, Marcus, you're here early." The way she said it made it sound like an accusation, like I'd violated some unspoken rule by arriving on time. Amanda worked at Children's Hospital, which gave her a certain authority in family discussions. She saved lives. She helped people. She mattered. Her scrubs had been replaced by a casual dress and cardigan, but she still carried herself with the confidence of someone whose work had obvious value. Mike appeared behind her, slightly out of breath. He managed a sporting goods store and coached Little League on weekends. Good guy. Steady. The kind of man parents hope their daughters will marry. He shook my hand with genuine warmth, which was more than I usually got. "Hey, Marcus, how's everything going, man?" "Can't complain," I said, which was the truth. I really couldn't. Dad entered last as always. Richard Thompson, 62 years old, retired from 35 years at Pacific Steel, where he worked his way up from floor supervisor to plant manager. He believed in hard work, punctuality, and earning your place in the world. His gray hair was combed neat, his polo shirt was pressed, and his leather wallet bulged with credit cards and cash that he'd carefully counted before leaving the house. He surveyed the table like a general reviewing troops. "Good. Everyone's here." He settled into his chair at the head of the table, and somehow the energy in the room shifted. Conversations became more formal. Postures straightened. The monthly performance was about to begin. The waitress took our order exactly as Dad dictated it. Kevin discussed a new development project near the waterfront. Amanda talked about a recent surgery she'd assisted with. Sarah shared updates about the school fundraiser. Mike mentioned plans to expand the store. Everyone had something to report, some achievement to highlight, some progress to demonstrate. Then Dad turned to me. "Marcus, my name came out flat. Matter of fact, how are the finances?" "Still tight." The question hit the table like a stone dropped in still water. Conversation stopped. Everyone suddenly found their napkins very interesting. This was the monthly ritual, the check-in, the reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. "I'm managing," I said quietly. "That's not what I asked." Dad's voice carried the same tone he'd used when I was 12, and had broken a window with a baseball. "You haven't asked for help in a while. Usually means you're either doing better or doing worse. Which is it?" Kevin shifted in his seat. Amanda studied her salad. Sarah smiled that same teacher's smile. Mike looked genuinely uncomfortable, but he didn't intervene. This was Thompson family business, and he'd married into it knowing the rules. "I'm doing fine, Dad." "Fine," he repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Fine doesn't pay rent. Fine doesn't put food on the table. Fine is what people say when they're too proud to admit they need help." The pizza arrived, giving everyone something to focus on besides the tension. Dad served himself first, then Kevin, then the women, then Mike. I got what was left, always last, always the least. "You know," Dad continued, cutting his slice into precise geometric pieces, "there's no shame in needing assistance. Family takes care of family, but you have to be honest about your situation." I took a bite of pizza and chewed slowly. The cheese was good. The sauce had the right amount of seasoning. Romano's made decent food, which was probably why Dad kept booking this room month after month. Neutral territory, public enough to keep emotions in check, private enough to have these conversations. "I appreciate the concern," I said finally, "but I'm really doing okay." Kevin looked up from his plate. "Marcus, come on, we're not judging you. We've all been there. When I was starting out, I couldn't afford decent office space. Dad helped me with the down payment on my first commercial lease. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it." "That's different," I said. "You had a business plan, you had collateral, you had a clear path to paying it back. And you don't?" Amanda's voice carried a sharp edge. "That's the problem, Marcus. You never have a plan. You just drift from job to job, apartment to apartment, always waiting for something to happen instead of making it happen." The familiar weight settled on my chest, the same conversation, the same assumptions, the same conclusion. They looked at my used car, my modest apartment, my thrift store clothes, and they saw failure. They saw someone who needed rescuing, someone who couldn't figure out how to be a proper adult. What they didn't see was the phone in my pocket, that had been buzzing with notifications all evening. Messages from my assistant in New York, updates from my investment manager in San Francisco, reports from the team in Singapore about overnight market movements, numbers with more zeros than this entire family saw in a year. But I let them think what they thought, because explaining the truth would require explaining everything else, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. "I just think," Dad continued, his voice softer now, almost gentle, "that maybe it's time to consider some practical options. Kevin's company is expanding. They could use someone in customer service. It's not glamorous, but it's a steady income. benefits, a chance to learn the business from the ground up, customer service. I almost smiled. If only he knew that 3 days ago, I'd have been on a conference call with executives from 12 different countries, discussing the acquisition of a manufacturing plant in Ohio. If only he knew that the practical options he was suggesting would represent the biggest step backward of my adult life. Thanks, Dad. I'll think about it. He nodded, satisfied that he'd done his fatherly duty. The conversation moved on to safer topics: Amanda's daughter's soccer team, Kevin's new client, Sarah's upcoming parent-teacher conferences, normal family stuff, the kind of updates that fill space between the important moments. I ate my pizza and listened to their voices blend together into comfortable background noise. These people loved me, in their way. They worried about me. They wanted me to be successful, but only in terms they could understand, only in ways that made sense within their framework of how the world worked. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. They couldn't see past the surface because I'd never given them reason to look deeper. For 8 years I'd maintained this careful performance. The struggling younger brother, the family disappointment, the one who needed help but was too proud to ask for it properly. Tomorrow, I will go back to my apartment, above the jazz-playing coffee shop. I would sit at my kitchen table with my laptop and my secure phone connections. I would make decisions that affected thousands of jobs, millions of dollars, entire market sectors. I would be exactly who I'd become over the past decade, someone they would never recognize. But tonight, I was just Marcus. The one who sat at the end of the table and let his father worry about his finances. The one who drove home in a dented Honda while his brother climbed into a BMW. The one who smiled and nodded and said he'd think about the customer service position. The dinner ended like they always did. Dad paid the check. Kevin talked about his schedule. Amanda gathered her purse and keys. Sarah mentioned how nice it was to see everyone. Mike shook my hand again and said to hang in there. I sat in my car for a few minutes after they all left, watching their taillights disappear into the Portland night. My phone buzzed again, a text from my private banker in Switzerland, confirming a wire transfer, another from my attorney in Delaware, updating me on a corporate filing, a third from my accountant, reminding me about quarterly tax estimates. $53,407,812. That was the number as of market close today. Give or take a few $100,000 depending on after-hours trading. I started the Honda and pulled out of the parking lot, heading home to my $1,200 a month apartment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new decisions that would add or subtract millions from that number. But tonight, I was just the Thompson's son who needed to think about customer service jobs. For now, that was enough. The performance could continue. The truth could wait, but not much longer. The morning after Romano's dinner, I woke up at 4:30 a.m., not because I had to, but because global markets never sleep, and opportunities don't wait for convenient time zones. My apartment was still dark, the coffee shop below still hours away from opening. This was my favorite time of day. The world was quiet, but money was moving. I made coffee in the French press that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, though it looked ordinary enough, sitting on my IKEA counter. The laptop I opened was a standard Dell, nothing flashy, but the encrypted networks I accessed through it connected me to trading floors in London, Hong Kong, and Sydney. By the time most people were hitting their snooze buttons, I'd already reviewed overnight reports from 3 continents. My phone buzzed. Elena Rodriguez, my assistant in Manhattan. Marcus, the sole deal cleared regulatory approval. They're ready to proceed with the wire transfer. How much? I asked, though I already knew. 12.7 million. Should hit the account by noon Eastern. $12.7 million. More money than my entire family would earn in their combined lifetimes. And it was just Tuesday morning's first transaction. But it wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, I was exactly what my family thought I still was. A college dropout with no clear direction, bouncing between dead-end jobs and half-formed dreams. The difference was, I'd gotten tired of being that person. They never noticed when I stopped. It started with a laptop and a library card. 2014, I was working at a warehouse in Gresham, loading trucks for $10 an hour. My shift ended at 3 p.m., which gave me 4 hours at the central library before it closed. I'd sit in the business section, reading everything I could find about markets, investments, and international trade. Books written by hedge fund managers, case studies of successful acquisitions, technical analysis guides that most people found impossibly boring. The librarians got used to seeing me there every day. Mrs. Chen would save the new arrivals for me. Mr. Patterson would let me know when someone returned a book I'd been waiting for. They probably thought I was studying for college courses. They never asked, and I never corrected them. I started small. $50 here, $100 there, micro-investments in penny stocks. Mostly, I lost money for the first 6 months, lost a lot of money, but I kept detailed records of every trade, every mistake, every lesson learned. Slowly, the patterns started making sense. The market wasn't random chaos, it was a language, and I was learning to speak it fluently. By 2015, I'd turned my initial $500 into $3,000. By 2016, that became $15,000. Still working at the warehouse, still living in a studio apartment that smelled like the Mexican restaurant downstairs. But my bank account was growing, while my family's assumptions about me remained frozen in time. The breakthrough came in 2017. I'd been tracking a small biotech company in San Diego. They were developing a new treatment for diabetes, something revolutionary. The stock was trading at $2.40 per share, and everyone thought it was overvalued, too risky, too speculative. But I'd read their research papers, studied their patent applications, and analyzed their clinical trial data. The science was solid. The market just couldn't see it yet. I invested everything. Every dollar I'd saved, plus money I borrowed against my car, my credit cards, even a small loan from a payday lender. $37,000 at $2.40 per share. My family would have called it insane. My friends would have staged an intervention, but I was operating on information, not emotion. 6 months later, the FDA approved their treatment. The stock hit $89 per share overnight. My $37,000 became $1.3 million in a single trading session. I quit the warehouse job the next day. Told my supervisor I was moving out of state. Didn't mention that my new state was financial independence. I found a different apartment. This one with better internet and a dedicated office space. Registered an LLC in Delaware, opened business accounts in 3 different banks. Started operating like the company I'd accidentally become. The biotech windfall was just the beginning. I reinvested everything, diversifying across sectors and geographies. Technology startups in Austin, real estate developments in Miami, manufacturing operations in Vietnam. I learned Mandarin through online courses so I could read Chinese financial reports firsthand. I studied Arabic to understand Middle Eastern oil markets. I hired translators for documents in languages I couldn't master quickly enough. By 2019, I was managing just over $8 million across dozens of investments. But managing that much money requires infrastructure. I hired Elena to handle communications and scheduling. Found Marcus Klein, a brilliant CPA in Boston who specialized in international tax law, retained Rebecca Walsh, a corporate attorney who'd previously worked for Goldman Sachs, built a team of professionals who could operate at the level my growing empire required. The family dinners continued every month. Same restaurant, same seating arrangement, same conversations, but while Kevin talked about closing another small real estate deal, I was quietly acquiring entire apartment complexes in emerging markets. While Amanda discussed her nursing shifts, I was funding medical device startups that would revolutionize patient care. While Dad worried about my financial stability, I was developing stability for thousands of other people through the companies I backed. The hardest part wasn't managing the money. It was managing the secret. Every month I sat at that table and listened to their concerns, their advice, their gentle suggestions about practical career paths and realistic expectations. Kevin would mention entry-level positions at his company. Amanda would suggest healthcare administration programs. Dad would offer to co-sign a loan for trade school. All of them trying to help me become a productive member of society, never realizing I'd become one of the most productive members they'd ever meet. But explaining would have required explaining everything. The late nights monitoring Asian markets, the conference calls with CEOs in 12 different time zones, the pressure of making decisions that affected hundreds of jobs, thousands of investors, entire economic sectors. They saw me as someone who couldn't handle a simple retail job. How could I tell them I was handling billion-dollar market movements? So I maintained the performance, drove the used Honda. I lived in a modest apartment, shopped at thrift stores, and used the same phone for 3 years. I became expert at looking unsuccessful while being anything but. It was easier than explaining, and honestly, it was safer. Wealth attracts attention, and attention attracts problems I didn't need. The money kept growing. Strategic investments in electric vehicle infrastructure before Tesla made it mainstream, early positions in renewable energy companies before government subsidies made them profitable, cryptocurrency purchases in 2018, when everyone called it a bubble, then sales in 2021 when everyone called it the future. I wasn't predicting the future. I was just reading the present more carefully than most people bothered to. By 2022, I'd crossed the $30 million threshold. By early 2023, it was $40 million. The numbers were becoming abstract, almost meaningless. When you can buy anything you want, wanting becomes the challenge, not buying. I lived the same life I'd always lived, just with more security and more options I chose not to exercise. My team grew with the portfolio. Elena hired 2 assistants to handle the increasing volume of communications. Marcus Klein brought in partners to manage the tax implications of operating across multiple jurisdictions. Rebecca Walsh connected me with specialists in mergers and acquisitions, intellectual property law, and international regulatory compliance. I was running a sophisticated financial operation from an apartment above a jazz-playing coffee shop, and nobody suspected a thing. The only close call came last spring. Amanda had stopped by unexpectedly, something about returning a book she'd borrowed months earlier. I was on a video conference with a manufacturing consortium in Germany, discussing a potential acquisition worth $47 million. She knocked just as I was reviewing environmental impact assessments with a team of engineers in Munich. I muted the call, minimized the window, and opened the door wearing my old warehouse uniform shirt and a confused expression. "Amanda, what's up?" "Just returning your book," she said, holding up a paperback thriller I'd forgotten I'd loaned her. "What are you doing at home? Don't you usually work mornings?" "Called in sick," I replied, coughing slightly for effect. "Stomach bug." She peered past me into the apartment. The laptop was visible on the kitchen table, but the screen showed a basic web browser instead of encrypted financial networks. "You should get some rest, and maybe think about finding something with better health insurance." After she left, I returned to the conference call. The German engineers were still discussing soil contamination reports. The numbers were still the same. The deal was still worth more money than my sister would see in 10 lifetimes. But for a moment, sitting there in my warehouse shirt, talking to concerned relatives, both worlds had almost collided. That night, I made a decision. The performance was becoming harder to maintain. The questions were getting more pointed. The concern was becoming more intrusive. And frankly, the money was reaching levels where secrecy was becoming its own burden. At some point, the truth would come out. The only question was whether I would control the revelation or whether circumstances would. I started planning, not for investment strategies or market positions, but for the conversation I'd been avoiding for nearly a decade. The moment when Marcus the family disappointment would have to become Marcus the, what? Multimillionaire? Financial wizard? Accidental tycoon? I wasn't sure what label would fit, But I knew the time was coming when labels would be necessary. The family dinner invitation came 2 days later. Third Tuesday, Romano's Italian, same private room. Dad's voice on the phone was the same as always. Casual but expectant. Kevin would be there. Amanda would be there. Sarah and Mike would be there. All of them ready for another monthly check-in on my continuing failure to launch. But this time, I was ready for something different. This time, I was going to give them exactly what they'd been asking for. The truth about my financial situation. All of it. Every last dollar. I just wasn't sure they'd believe it. The rift didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion that began in college and deepened with every choice I made that my family couldn't understand. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when their disappointment crystallized into permanent judgment. It was Thanksgiving 2014, 3 months after I'd dropped out of Portland State University. I was majoring in business administration, following the path Dad had mapped out during my senior year of high school. Get your degree, find a stable company, work your way up the ladder, he'd said. That's how you build a real life. Kevin had graduated with a degree in economics and immediately landed a position with a commercial real estate firm. Amanda was finishing nursing school with honors. Even by Thompson family standards, I was on track for success. Then I discovered something that changed everything. The classroom was teaching me about business, but the real business world was moving faster than any curriculum could follow. While my professors discussed case studies from the 1990s, I was reading about algorithmic trading and cryptocurrency markets and global supply chain disruptions happening in real time. The gap between academic theory and market reality was enormous, and I was paying $40,000 a year to learn information that was already obsolete. I tried to explain this to my academic advisor, Dr. Richardson. The business landscape is evolving too quickly for traditional education to keep pace, I told him during our spring meeting. I'm learning more from online resources and real-world observation than from any of my required courses. Dr. Richardson was a pleasant man in his 60s who'd spent his entire career in academia. He listened patiently, then leaned back in his chair and smiled. Marcus, every generation thinks they've discovered something new, but fundamental business principles don't change. You need the foundation before you can build anything meaningful. But what if the foundation is cracking? I asked. What if the principles we're learning were designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore? Son, he said, his tone shifting to gentle condescension, that's exactly the kind of thinking that gets young people into trouble. You think you can skip the basics and jump straight to advanced concepts. It doesn't work that way. I left his office feeling more convinced than ever that I was wasting my time. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my relationship with my family. I withdrew from Portland State University, effective immediately. The conversation with Dad happened 3 days later. He'd received the official notification from the registrar's office and called me at 6 a.m. His voice tight with controlled anger. Explain to me why I just got a letter saying you've dropped out of school. Because I dropped out of school, I said. Simple truth. No elaboration. That's not an explanation, Marcus. That's a repetition. Why did you drop out? I tried to articulate what I'd discovered. The disconnect between classroom theory and market reality. The opportunity cost of spending 4 years learning outdated information when I could be gaining real experience. The fact that most successful entrepreneurs had either dropped out or bypassed traditional education entirely. I laid out my reasoning logically, methodically, the way he'd taught me to present arguments. He listened in silence until I finished. Then he said, "So you think you're smarter than everyone else?" That's not what I said. It's what you're implying. You think you know better than professors who've spent their careers studying business. You think you know better than your brother, who got his degree and has a successful career. You think you know better than me, who worked for 35 years to give you opportunities I never had. The conversation spiraled from there. Dad saw my decision as arrogance. I saw his reaction as inflexibility. We were speaking different languages, and neither of us was particularly interested in translation. The Thanksgiving dinner that year was when the disappointment became official family policy. Kevin had just closed his first major commercial deal. Amanda had received recognition for academic excellence in her nursing program. The table was full of celebration and achievement. And then Dad turned to me. "Marcus has decided to leave college," he announced to the extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them gathered around my grandmother's dining room table. "He thinks he can succeed without education." The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt every pair of eyes shift to me, waiting for explanation or defense. Instead, I said, "I'm exploring other opportunities." "Other opportunities," repeated Uncle Frank, Kevin's father-in-law. "Like what?" "I'm studying market dynamics and investment strategies, learning to analyze financial trends and identify emerging opportunities." The table went quiet. Then, Uncle Frank chuckled. "You mean you're gambling?" "No, I mean I'm learning to understand how money actually moves in the modern economy, instead of reading textbooks about how it moved 20 years ago." "Son," Dad's voice carried a warning, "this is not the time or place for this discussion." But I was 22 years old and convinced I was right. "When is the time? When you decide I've failed enough to prove your point." Amanda set down her fork. "Marcus, nobody wants you to fail. We want you to succeed, but success requires discipline and commitment. You can't just quit when things get challenging." "Who said I was quitting?" "You literally quit college," Kevin said. "That's the definition of quitting." "I left an institution that wasn't serving my goals to pursue a different path." "That's not quitting, that's redirecting." The argument continued for another 10 minutes, with various family members offering their perspectives on education, responsibility, and realistic expectations. But the damage was done. I could see it in their faces. The shift from disappointment to something deeper, not just disagreement with my choice, but fundamental doubt about my judgment, my character, my capacity for success. That night, driving home to my studio apartment, I made another decision. I would prove them wrong. Not through arguments or explanations, but through results. I would build something so undeniably successful that their doubts would become irrelevant. I would become living proof that alternative paths could lead to extraordinary destinations. What I didn't anticipate was how long that proof would take to manifest, or how completely my family's initial skepticism would calcify into permanent assumption. The months that followed were difficult. I worked at the warehouse loading trucks, which Dad saw as confirmation that dropping out had been a mistake. I spent my free time at the library studying markets and trading strategies, which my family viewed as escapism. When I mentioned my interest in investment opportunities, they heard get-rich-quick schemes. When I discussed global market trends, they heard unrealistic fantasies. The worst part was that for the first 2 years, their skepticism seemed justified. I was losing money consistently, making rookie mistakes, learning expensive lessons about market volatility and emotional trading. My bank account was shrinking while my confidence remained stubbornly high. From the outside, I looked exactly like what they'd predicted. A college dropout with delusions of grandeur, working a dead-end job and wasting his money on gambling disguised as investing. Kevin tried to help in his way. He offered me a position with his real estate company, starting in customer service with potential for advancement. "You need to build a foundation," he said. "Learn how real businesses operate. Get some practical experience before you start thinking about high-level strategy." Amanda was more direct. "Marcus, you're living in a fantasy. Investment strategies, market analysis, you can barely afford your rent. You need to find a stable job. Maybe go back to school and stop pretending you're some kind of financial genius." Even Mike, who generally stayed out of family business, weighed in. "I manage a sporting goods store and I see guys like you all the time. Smart guys who think they've figured out some angle, some shortcut to success. It never works out. You know what works: showing up every day, doing the work, building something slowly and steadily." Their concern was genuine. Their advice was reasonable. Their assessment of my situation was By all external measures, accurate. I was a warehouse worker with no degree, no significant savings, and no track record of success, claiming I could outsmart professional investors and market makers. It sounded insane because, frankly, it was insane. But insanity and innovation often look identical from the outside. The difference is in the results. And results take time to accumulate. By late 2016, I'd stopped trying to explain my activities to the family. When they asked about my job search, I gave vague answers about exploring options. When they offered advice about career development, I nodded politely and changed the subject. When they expressed concern about my financial stability, I assured them I was managing without providing details. The distance between us grew with each conversation. They saw my reluctance to discuss specifics as evasiveness. I saw their persistent questioning as lack of faith. We were both right, and we were both wrong, but neither side was willing to acknowledge the complexity. The breaking point came in early 2017, just before my biotech investment paid off. I was at Amanda's house warming party, surrounded by her friends from the hospital, professional people, stable people, people with clear career trajectories and predictable incomes. Someone asked what I did for work, and before I could answer, Amanda stepped in. "Marcus is between opportunities right now," she said with a smile that was meant to be supportive but felt patronizing. "He's been exploring different options, trying to find the right fit." The subtext was clear to everyone in the room. Marcus was unemployed. Marcus was struggling. Marcus was the family member you felt sorry for but didn't take seriously. I stood there holding a beer and listening to my sister manage my reputation like damage control, and I realized something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just skeptical of my choices anymore. They were embarrassed by them. Embarrassed by me. I had become the Thompson family's cautionary tale, the example of what happens when someone thinks they're too smart for conventional wisdom. That night, I drove home, knowing that the next phase of my plan had to be different. I couldn't just build wealth quietly and hope they'd notice. I couldn't keep assuming that the results would speak for themselves. The gap between their perception and my reality had grown too wide for subtle revelation. When my biotech investment exploded 6 months later, turning my $37,000 into $1.3 million overnight, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding success, but because I realized something crucial. They weren't just wrong about my capabilities, they were invested in being wrong. Their entire understanding of how the world worked depended on my failure confirming their assumptions about education, responsibility, and realistic expectations. Proving them wrong wouldn't just change their opinion of me, it would force them to question everything else they believed about success, security, and the proper way to build a life. And most people, I was learning, would rather be comfortably wrong than uncomfortably challenged. So I let them think what they thought. I played the role they'd written for me, and I waited for the right moment to rewrite the entire script. The years between 2017 and 2024 were defined by a strange double life that became increasingly difficult to maintain. On one side was Marcus Thompson, the family disappointment who worked odd jobs and lived paycheck to paycheck. On the other was Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Holdings LLC, whose investment decisions moved millions of dollars across global markets daily. The logistics alone were exhausting. I maintained 3 different phone numbers: my personal cell that my family called, a secure business line for international communications, and an encrypted satellite phone for emergency market situations. My apartment served multiple functions: living space, corporate headquarters, and elaborate stage set for maintaining my cover story. Every morning started with a 4 a.m. market review. Asian exchanges closed just as European markets opened, creating a brief window where I could analyze overnight movements and position for the day ahead. By 6 a.m., I was usually on conference calls with fund managers in London or Frankfurt, discussing currency fluctuations and geopolitical impacts on commodity prices. By 8 a.m., I'd switched personas entirely, driving my dented Honda to whatever part-time job I was using as my current cover story. The jobs were necessary props in my performance. For 6 months, I worked at a garden center in Hillsborough, which gave me an excuse to be tired and dirty when family called. Then a brief stint at a call center, which explained why I couldn't always answer the phone immediately. After that, I claimed to be doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses, which was technically true since I was managing my own increasingly complex financial empire. Elena coordinated everything from her office in Manhattan. She became expert at translating my real schedule into family-friendly explanations. When I was in video conferences with manufacturing executives in Vietnam, she would tell anyone who called that I was at work and couldn't be disturbed. When I was reviewing acquisition proposals for renewable energy projects, she would handle routine correspondence so I wouldn't be interrupted. The closest I came to exposure was during Kevin's birthday party in 2019. I'd been managing a crisis situation with a tech startup in Austin whose regulatory approval had been delayed, potentially costing investors $15 million. My phone rang during the cake ceremony with an urgent update from our corporate attorney. I stepped outside to take the call, speaking quietly but with obvious authority about legal strategies and contingency planning. Sarah noticed me through the window and later asked Kevin about it. Marcus was on some business call, she said. He sounded very professional, almost like he was in charge of something important. Kevin laughed. Marcus? He's probably talking to a customer service representative about his credit card or something. You know how he gets when he's dealing with bureaucracy. That explanation satisfied everyone because it fit their existing narrative about me. I was the kind of person who would get worked up over minor administrative issues. Not someone who would be managing complex corporate negotiations. Their assumptions had become my camouflage, but the emotional cost was mounting. Sitting through monthly dinners where they discussed their modest professional achievements, while I was privately managing transactions that dwarfed their annual salaries, became surreal. When Kevin celebrated closing a $2 million real estate deal, I congratulated him genuinely while knowing I'd earned more than that in market gains during our conversation. When Amanda talked about the hospital's budget constraints affecting patient care, I wanted to tell her I could fund their entire emergency department renovation without affecting my liquidity. The isolation was profound. Success without recognition is a special kind of loneliness. I had achieved financial independence beyond most people's wildest dreams, but I couldn't share that achievement with the people who mattered most to me. Instead, I watched them worry about my future, offer me career advice, and occasionally slip me small amounts of cash when they thought I wasn't looking. Dad started leaving 20s in my jacket pocket when I visited. Amanda would accidentally buy too much groceries and insist I take the extras home. Kevin began including me in family events that came with free meals, making sure I ate well at least once a week. Their kindness was genuine, and it made the deception harder to maintain. The worst moment came during Christmas 2021. The pandemic had disrupted global supply chains, creating massive opportunities in logistics and manufacturing. I'd spent 6 months positioning for the recovery, building partnerships with companies that would benefit from reshoring initiatives and supply chain diversification. By December, those investments were generating returns of over 400%, adding nearly $20 million to my portfolio in a single quarter. But the pandemic had also strained everyone else's finances. Kevin's real estate business had slowed significantly. Amanda was working extra shifts at hazard pay that barely covered increased childcare costs. Mike's sporting goods store had nearly closed during the lockdowns. They were all struggling while I was experiencing the most profitable year of my career. At Christmas dinner, Dad announced that he'd decided to help everyone with their immediate financial challenges. He gave Kevin $5,000 toward his business loan payments. He gave Amanda $3,000 for her daughter's daycare expenses. He gave Mike $2,000 to help with store inventory. Then he turned to me. Marcus, I know things have been especially hard for you. No steady income, rent going up, everything more expensive. He handed me an envelope. This isn't charity, it's family taking care of family. Inside was $8,000 in cash, more than he'd given anyone else, because he assumed I needed it most. I stared at the money while my family watched expectantly, waiting for gratitude and relief. $8,000 I'd made more than that in capital gains during the time it took him to count out the bills. But I couldn't refuse without explaining why. I couldn't tell him that his generous gift represented less than 0.2% of my net worth. I couldn't admit that I was probably the wealthiest person in the room, possibly in the neighborhood, definitely in the family. So I took the money and said thank you, and felt like the most dishonest person who had ever lived. That night, I donated the $8,000 to the hospital where Amanda worked, specifically earmarked for emergency department equipment upgrades. I did it anonymously, through a shell foundation I'd established for charitable giving. Amanda mentioned the donation at the next family dinner, wondering aloud about the mystery benefactor who'd funded their new cardiac monitors. I smiled and said it was nice when people gave back to the community. The breaking point came in October 2024, during what should have been a routine family dinner. The market had been volatile all week due to geopolitical tensions in Eastern Europe affecting energy prices. I'd been managing crisis communications with portfolio companies, adjusting currency hedges, and coordinating with our risk management team to protect against potential losses. By Tuesday evening, I was exhausted from coordinating responses across multiple time zones, but I still drove to Romano's for the monthly Thompson family gathering. Same private room, same seating arrangement, same facade of being their struggling younger brother, who needed constant emotional and financial support. The conversation started normally. Kevin discussed a new retail development project. Amanda mentioned the hospital's upcoming accreditation review. Sarah talked about parent-teacher conferences. Mike shared updates about seasonal inventory challenges. Everyone had their usual updates about normal professional lives, with normal challenges and normal rewards. Then Dad shifted the conversation in a direction that caught me completely off guard. "I've been thinking," he said, cutting his pizza with methodical precision, "about financial planning, estate planning, specifically." Kevin looked up from his plate. "Is everything okay, Dad? Health-wise, I mean." "I'm fine, but I'm 62 years old, and I need to be realistic about the future. I want to make sure everyone's taken care of, but I also want to be smart about it." He pulled out a folder from the briefcase he'd brought. "I've been working with a financial advisor, looking at different options for distributing assets, minimizing tax implications, making sure the money goes where it can do the most good." The folder contained preliminary estate planning documents. I could see spreadsheets with current asset valuations, projected distributions, and beneficiary allocations. Dad had been thorough, cataloging everything from his pension benefits to the value of his house to the contents of his savings accounts. "Kevin, you and Sarah have steady incomes and good prospects. You'll inherit your share outright when the time comes. Amanda, same situation. You and Mike are financially stable, so you'll receive your portion directly." Then he looked at me. "Marcus, your situation is different. I've been thinking about setting up a trust, something that would provide you with steady income, but protect the principal from poor decisions." The words hit me like physical impacts. A trust. Because he didn't believe I could handle money responsibly. Because he saw me as someone who needed to be protected from my own judgment. Because even in death, he couldn't imagine trusting me with the same freedom he was giving his other children. "The trust would provide monthly payments," he continued. "Enough to cover your basic living expenses, maybe allow for some modest improvements in your lifestyle, but the principal would remain protected, managed by professionals who understand financial responsibility." Amanda nodded approvingly. "That's actually really thoughtful, Dad. It ensures Marcus will always have security, even if his earning potential remains limited." Kevin agreed. "Smart planning. Trust structures can be excellent tools for beneficiaries who might struggle with lump sum management." Sarah smiled supportively. "It's like having training wheels for financial independence." Training wheels. For financial independence. I was sitting at a table where my family was seriously discussing whether I could be trusted with an inheritance, while my phone was buzzing with notifications about international wire transfers worth more than their combined net worth. The conversation continued around me. Details about trustee selection, distribution schedules, oversight mechanisms. They were designing a financial cage for my own protection. They were proud of their thoughtfulness. They were solving a problem that didn't exist by imposing restrictions on someone who was already exponentially wealthier than anyone they'd ever met. I listened to them plan my financial future while I knew that by market close that day, my portfolio had grown by more than Dad's entire life savings. I watched them design a trust to manage money I didn't need, while I was privately funding startup companies and infrastructure projects that would create thousands of jobs. But the final straw came when Dad pulled out a second document. "I've also been thinking about immediate help," he said. "Marcus, I know you've been struggling. I know you're too proud to ask for assistance, but family means not having to ask." He slid a check across the table. "Pay to the order of Marcus Thompson. $50,000. "This isn't a loan," he said firmly. "This is a gift. No repayment expected, no conditions attached. Use it to get back on your feet. Maybe take some classes, learn a trade, find a stable career path. You're still young enough to turn things around." $50,000. A transformative amount of money for someone in the financial situation they believed I was in. A gesture of profound generosity from a father who had worked his entire life to accumulate savings that would allow him to help his struggling son. And for me, it was less than I'd made in portfolio appreciation during the appetizer course. I stared at the check while my family watched expectantly, waiting for gratitude, relief, maybe tears of appreciation, waiting for me to finally accept the help they'd been trying to provide for years, waiting for confirmation that their assessment of my situation had been accurate all along. Instead, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for nearly a decade. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The secure app that required biometric authentication and showed real-time balances across multiple accounts in different currencies. The app that my family had never seen, connected to accounts they didn't know existed. "Dad," I said quietly, "before I accept this, there's something I need to show you." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying a meal, or the awkward pause of an uncomfortable topic. This was the profound stillness that happens when reality suddenly shifts beneath everyone's feet. I held my phone so the screen was visible to the entire table. The main account summary displayed clearly 523,080.47. Below it, a scrolling list of subsidiary accounts, investment portfolios, and business holdings. Numbers that kept updating in real time as global markets continued their constant motion. Dad stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds before speaking. "What is this?" "My bank statement," I said simply. "Current balance as of about 4 minutes ago when the London exchange closed." Kevin leaned forward, squinting at the phone like it might be displaying some kind of elaborate fake. "Marcus, what are you showing us? Is this some kind of app game?" I swiped to a different screen, showing transaction history, incoming wire transfers from international banks, dividend payments from major corporations, capital gains distributions from investment funds. Each transaction was documented with timestamps, reference numbers, and detailed descriptions. "This is not a game," I said. "This is my actual financial portfolio. These are my real accounts, managed by actual banks, holding actual money." Amanda's face went through several expressions simultaneously: confusion, disbelief, then something approaching fear. "Marcus, if this is real, how? How is this possible?" I swiped to another screen, showing my investment holdings. Tech startups in Silicon Valley, manufacturing operations in Southeast Asia, renewable energy projects across 3 continents, real estate developments in emerging markets. Each holding was documented with current valuations, performance metrics, and projected returns. "I've been building this for 10 years, I said. "Since shortly after I dropped out of college. Every month when we've been sitting here talking about my financial struggles, I've been managing investments worth more than all of our combined annual salaries." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "But you work at a garden center." "I worked at a garden center for 6 months in 2018. As cover. Before that, I used a call center job as an explanation for why I couldn't always take personal calls during business hours. Before that, the warehouse job gave me credibility as someone who was struggling financially. Mike was shaking his head slowly. You've been lying to us for 10 years. I've been protecting you from information you weren't ready to process. I corrected. Every time I tried to explain what I was actually doing, you interpreted it as delusion or fantasy. It was easier to let you think what you wanted to think. Dad was still staring at the phone screen. Show me the account details. I navigated to the detailed portfolio breakdown. Holdings organized by sector, geographic region, and risk profile. Performance analytics, showing returns that would make professional fund managers jealous. Documentation of successful exits, strategic acquisitions, and market positions that had generated millions in profits. Thomson Holdings, LLC, I said, pointing to the company name that appeared throughout the documentation. My primary investment vehicle, incorporated in Delaware, with subsidiary operations in 12 countries. I employ 43 people across 4 continents, including a full-time staff of analysts, attorneys, and administrators. Kevin's voice was hollow. 43 employees? Elena Rodriguez, my executive assistant in Manhattan. Marcus Klein, my CPA in Boston. Rebecca Walsh, my corporate attorney in Chicago, plus analysts in London, Hong Kong, and Sydney, plus operational staff for our various business interests. I showed them Elena's contact information in my phone, then placed a call on speaker. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, good evening. I have the sole acquisition documents ready for your review, and the Zurich Bank confirmed the currency hedge position. Should I send the files to your secure email? Elena, I'm with my family right now. Could you briefly explain what Thomson Holdings does? There was a slight pause. Elena had never been asked to explain our business to anyone from my personal life. Certainly. Thomson Holdings is a private investment firm, specializing in strategic equity positions in emerging markets and technology sectors. We currently manage approximately $53.8 million across diversified portfolios, with active positions in 27 countries. The table was completely silent. Elena continued. Today's major activities included finalizing the acquisition of a manufacturing facility in Ohio, confirming regulatory approval for our biotech investment in Germany, and reviewing proposals for 3 renewable energy projects in South America. Standard Tuesday operations. Thank you, Elena. Could you also confirm my calendar for tomorrow? 9 a.m. video conference with the Samsung partnership team in Seoul. 11 a.m. call with our Munich engineering consultants about the automotive battery project. 2 p.m. meeting with potential investors for Indonesian infrastructure development. 4 p.m. review session with the risk management team about currency exposure in Eastern European markets. I thanked Elena and ended the call. My family stared at the phone like it had just spoken in an alien language. Amanda was the first to break the silence. You actually run a company worth $50 million. 53.8, as of today's market close, though it fluctuates significantly based on currency movements and market volatility. Dad leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. Why didn't you tell us? Because every time I tried to explain what I was doing, you told me I was being unrealistic. When I talked about investment strategies, you heard gambling. When I discussed market analysis, you heard fantasy. When I mentioned building wealth through alternative methods, you heard excuses for not getting a traditional job. I pulled up another app, showing news alerts about companies in my portfolio. 3 weeks ago, you were concerned about me affording my rent. That same week, I funded the startup costs for a medical device company that's developing artificial heart valves. Last month, when you offered to help me find a customer service position, I was negotiating the acquisition of a logistics company that employs 800 people. Kevin was studying the phone screen intently. These numbers, are they real? This isn't some elaborate prank. I handed him the phone. Call the number for Marcus Klein, my accountant. Ask him about the quarterly tax estimates he prepared for Thomson Holdings. Kevin hesitated, then dialed. Marcus Klein answered promptly and confirmed that he was indeed preparing tax documentation for Thompson Holdings LLC, that the company was legitimate, and that yes, the financial figures Kevin was asking about were accurate within normal fluctuation ranges. When Kevin ended the call, he set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. "How?" Sarah asked. "How did you build something this large without any of us knowing?" "The same way anyone builds wealth," I said. "Through careful research, strategic risk-taking, and disciplined execution. The only difference was that I started without credentials, so I had to prove myself through results instead of degrees. I opened a different app showing my educational certifications. I've completed professional courses from Harvard Business School, Wharton, and the London School of Economics. All online, all self-funded. I speak conversational Mandarin and Arabic because global markets require global communication. I've been to 26 countries on business trips you thought were job interviews." Dad's voice was quiet. "The money I've been giving you, I've been donating to various charities. The $8,000 from Christmas went to Amanda's hospital for new cardiac monitors. Anonymous donation, no recognition required." Amanda gasped. "The mystery benefactor, that was you." "Most of the Thompson family financial assistance has been redistributed to causes that would benefit people who actually need help. I kept detailed records for tax purposes." The waitress appeared at our table, clearly confused by the intense conversation and abandoned food. "Is everything okay? Can I bring anything else?" Dad looked up at her with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been inverted. "Check. Please." She left, and we sat in the aftermath of revelation. 10 years of assumptions shattered in the span of 20 minutes. 10 years of concern, advice, and financial assistance provided to someone who was secretly wealthier than all of them combined. Kevin was the first to speak. "I don't understand how this is possible. How does someone go from warehouse worker to this?" "The same way someone goes from college graduate to successful real estate developer," I said, "through learning, risk-taking, and persistence. The only difference was the path I chose wasn't one you recognized." Amanda was looking at me like I was a stranger. "Who are you? Really?" "I'm the same person I've always been. I just have more money than you realized." Dad was still processing. The trust I was planning, the inheritance structure, would have given me access to maybe $200,000 over 10 years, while I was already generating more than that in quarterly returns. I softened my tone. "Dad, I appreciate the thought. I appreciate all the help you've tried to give me, but I haven't needed financial assistance for a very long time." The check arrived. Dad reached for it automatically, then stopped. "Should you? Can you? I can cover dinner," I said quietly. "I can cover a lot of things." We didn't return to Romano's the following month. The private dining room with its frosted glass doors had become a symbol of something that no longer existed. The comfortable fiction that had defined our family dynamics for nearly a decade. Instead, we met at my apartment for the first time since I'd moved in. They'd never seen my living space before because I'd carefully maintained the illusion that it was too small, too modest, too embarrassing to host family gatherings. In reality, the apartment was understated by choice, not necessity. The furniture was simple but high quality. The technology was cutting edge but discreet. The art was original but not ostentatious. What surprised them most was the home office. 3 monitors displaying real-time market data, a conference phone for international calls, and filing cabinets containing years of investment documentation. The nerve center of a multi-million-dollar operation, hidden in plain sight above a jazz-playing coffee shop. Dad sat at my kitchen table, where I'd eaten countless meals while managing business calls and reviewing acquisition proposals. He was holding a printed portfolio statement that Marcus Klein had prepared, studying the numbers like a code he was trying to crack. "Renewable energy in Brazil," he read aloud. "Technology startups in Austin, manufacturing operations in Vietnam." He looked up. "How do you even know about these opportunities?" "Research, constant research. I spend 4 to 6 hours every day analyzing markets, reading corporate reports, and studying geopolitical trends that might affect different sectors. I poured coffee into mugs that were nicer than anything I'd ever used at family dinners. The information is available if you know where to look and how to interpret it. Amanda was examining a framed photograph on my bookshelf. Me shaking hands with the CEO of a biotech company after a successful acquisition. I was wearing a suit that had cost more than her monthly salary. When was this taken? Last year in San Francisco, we'd just completed the purchase of a medical device manufacturer. It was one of our larger transactions. You look different, she said. Confidence, like you belong there. I do belong there. I've always belonged there. I just couldn't prove it in ways you would have recognized. Kevin was studying the wall, where I'd hung certificates from my various professional education programs. Executive leadership from Harvard. International finance from Wharton. Strategic planning from the London School of Economics. Are these all legitimate? Call the schools if you want to verify. I can provide student ID numbers and graduation dates. He shook his head slowly. It's not that I don't believe you. It's that I don't understand why you hid it. Why maintain the pretense for so long? I thought about that question, which had been implicit in every conversation since the revelation at Romano's. Because the truth was incompatible with your worldview. You needed me to be unsuccessful to validate your beliefs about education, traditional career paths, and financial responsibility. My success would have forced you to question assumptions you weren't ready to examine. Sarah was reading through a stack of business cards I'd accumulated over the years. CEOs, fund managers, government officials, academic researchers. All these people, they're your actual business contacts. Professional network. When you operate at certain levels, relationships become currency. Information, opportunities, strategic partnerships, they all flow through personal connections. Dad set down the portfolio statement. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. You responded to the information you had with the judgment you possessed. Your concerns were reasonable given what you could observe, but we were wrong. Completely wrong. About your capabilities, your judgment, your prospects. His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. We treated you like a failure when you were actually this. You treated me like someone who needed help, because that's what it looked like from the outside. The mistake wasn't your assessment. The mistake was my decision to maintain a deception that prevented accurate assessment. Amanda sat down across from me. Why now? Why reveal everything now? Because the performance was becoming unsustainable. The gap between your perception and my reality had grown too wide to manage. And honestly, because I was tired of being ashamed of my success, Mike, who had been quiet throughout most of the conversation, finally spoke. What happens now? Do we pretend the last 10 years didn't happen? We acknowledge that the last 10 years happened exactly as they needed to happen. You were operating with limited information and made reasonable decisions. I was building something that required secrecy until it was substantial enough to be undeniable. Everyone behaved rationally within their understanding of the situation. Dad was still struggling with the basic facts.
$53 million.
At 34 years old. With no college degree, education and intelligence aren't the same thing. Credentials and competence aren't identical. Traditional paths and successful outcomes don't have a causal relationship. I refilled his coffee. I learned what I needed to learn in the format that was most effective for my goals. Kevin was adding numbers on the portfolio statement. Your annual returns, they're extraordinary. Even professional fund managers would be impressed by these percentages. Professional fund managers operate under constraints. I don't face regulatory requirements, investor expectations, institutional risk management protocols. When you're managing your own money with your own risk tolerance, you can pursue opportunities that larger firms can't touch. The afternoon continued with a gradual recalibration of family dynamics. They asked questions about specific investments, business strategies, and future plans. I answered honestly, sharing information I'd been guarding for years. The relief of transparency was profound. But the most significant change was subtle. They started asking for my opinion on their own financial decisions. Kevin mentioned a potential real estate investment and wanted my perspective on market timing. Amanda asked about 401k allocation strategies. Dad inquired about refinancing his mortgage. For the first time in my adult life, they were treating me as someone whose judgment they respected. The transformation wasn't complete or immediate. Years of established patterns don't disappear overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. The monthly dinners resumed, but now they included actual business discussions instead of career counseling sessions. I started sharing details about my work instead of deflecting questions about my finances. More importantly, I began using my resources in ways that benefited everyone. I quietly restructured Kevin's business debt to improve his cash flow. I funded a research grant at Amanda's hospital for equipment upgrades. I established education savings accounts for my nephew and niece, ensuring their college expenses would never be a family financial burden. 6 months after the revelation, Dad asked if I would consider helping him restructure his retirement planning. Not because he needed money, but because he wanted access to the investment opportunities I'd identified. The conversation was professional, respectful, and based on mutual recognition of competence. That night, driving home from his house, I realized something had been restored that I hadn't fully appreciated losing. Not just family acceptance, but family partnership. For the first time since college, we were operating as equals, contributing different strengths to shared objectives. The dented Honda finally got repaired. Not because I needed to maintain a cover story, but because I realized that hiding success had become its own kind of performance. I bought a reasonable car, moved to a better apartment, and started living in a way that aligned with my actual circumstances instead of my fictional ones. The most surprising change was how little material luxury mattered once it was freely available. The money had never been about possessions or status. It had been about freedom. The freedom to make choices based on values instead of constraints, to pursue opportunities without financial limitation, to help others without expecting recognition. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I manage a private investment firm worth over $50 million. My family finally knows who I am, and I finally know what it feels like to be understood by the people who matter most. The performance is over. The real story can begin. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.